Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Moore. This is the American Investigator, and thank you for joining me. It is Monday, May 12th, and I hope it's a sunny day wherever you are, kind of rainy where I am right now. I want to tell you about a bunch of things coming up that I know will just make you want to run out and subscribe, and not only subscribe, but subscribe and take a paid subscription to help us with independent journalism. But a lot of things coming up. First of all, this Friday, I think that's May 16th, this Friday, Congressman Tiffany will be joining me. We'll be talking about what's been going on in Washington since January 20th, when Donald J. Trump took office. We'll also be talking about the next 100 days, and we'll be talking specifically to part of the conversation. I hope to have a long conversation, but also, is Congress going to do anything to codify the 142 plus executive orders that Trump has signed and put into place? We all know that if the Democrats take the White House the next time around, if these executive orders are not codified, most of them will be washed away, swept away into the dustbin. We also know we cannot assume that the Republican Party will keep the House in the midterm elections in November of 2026. In fact, if history has any relevance here, the GOP is likely to lose, not because of their policies or politics necessarily, but because the party with the presidency generally loses seats, and there's not many seats to lose. That's not a foregone conclusion or a given. Certainly, the economy looks like it's turning around now, with inflation going down and food prices dropping and trade deals being put into place every day. Certainly, the Republicans can sweep, but we can't work from an assumption that that is going to happen. And so we'll be talking about the need. It has to be, we've got less than 2 years to codify many of those executive orders, put it into place as legislation, so it'll be much more difficult to get rid of. So Tom will be joining me on Friday, and we will have a long conversation. In a couple of weeks, Margaret Byfield, the executive director of American Stewards of Liberty, the foremost property rights organization in the United States today. She's out of Texas. She'll be joining me for a long conversation about the property rights movement. We were on the ropes during the Biden administration with his America the Beautiful 30 by 30, the administration's attempt to, quote unquote, protect, save all 30% of America's land and water by the year 2030, not far from now. And of course, they were well on their way. Donald Trump, that's one of the executive orders he signed. He scrapped that program. But the government is adept at coming at you and taking away your property and your property rights. And they come at you from every which way. They can buy the land outright, or they put land now under conservation easements. We're going to be talking about that. That's the biggest threat we face in Wisconsin for sure, and in much of the country, as they put these perpetual easements on, which make no sense, by the way. And environmentalists say it's the ultimate property right. It is the ultimate anti-property right, and we'll be talking about that. Margaret Byfield joining me in late May. Another conversation we're going to have is with a fellow named Mike Wilms. Mike Wilms is recently retired as president of Hendricks Holding Company. Now, Hendricks Holding Company, the CEO is Diane Hendricks. She is worth $21.9 billion. She is not just the richest woman in Wisconsin, she's the richest person in Wisconsin, one of the richest people in the country. She is a major heavy hitter when it comes to the GOP donor class, and she involves herself in many political efforts and backs many candidates. Mike Wilms was president of her holding company. He's going to be talking not anything to do with Diane Hendricks, but he has an impressive resume financially, and he's going to be talking about the Social Security system. His argument is that the Social Security system isn't going to go broke in the next 8 or 9 years, as most of the pundits and experts tell you. His thesis is that it's already broke, and it's been broke for many years. So he has some thoughts about what to do with that. That's a conversation that you're really going to want to stick around for. So right now, let's take a look at a couple of news stories, and then we're going to dig deep into a case, a property rights case that should be on everybody's mind. It's not really it's a property rights case, but it's also a case of the executive agencies taking power, or Congress ceding power to these executive agencies. This is a case where Congress has ceded its authority to criminalize, or to decide what to criminalize on our national parks, on the lands of our national parks. They've given that authority to the National Park Service. Whatever the National Park Service decides is criminal, well, that's what's criminal. Shouldn't Congress be making those calls? Well, anyway, there's a case about that. We'll be talking about that. But a couple of headlines. Well, the first thing today, of course, is over the weekend, Donald Trump the Trump administration secured a major trade agreement with China. And that trade agreement has sent now a lot of people's mind at ease on Wall Street. Stocks are soaring. I just looked before I began this podcast here on Monday afternoon. Stocks up 1,100 points, Apple up over 6%. And it makes you begin to think that maybe Donald Trump had a strategy all along, and that he was trying to leverage America's power and market power against these with the threat of these tariffs. It sort of makes the question that I wrote about at Macabre last week, whether these tariffs are constitutional or not, kind of moot. There was a big trade agreement last week, of course, with Great Britain and now China. And so with that good economic news, it looks as if we're going to get the framework to put the United States in a better trading position, reduce our trade deficit. China is, of course, one of the biggest offenders of fair trade agreements. They steal intellectual policy. They've manipulated currency for years. They heavily subsidize their industries to give them a price advantage. And through all that, the World Trade Organization has looked the other way. And so these trade agreements are fundamental to putting our products on a level playing field. That will bring manufacturing back to the United States. And what you will begin to see once that happens is a turning around of the American heartland, the rebuilding of our small towns. If we can couple that with energy, low energy cost, drill, baby, drill, and couple, and bring prices down, I think the United States will be in a strong economic position for years to come. The other thing that happened late last week in the news was a big brouhaha. Donald Trump jettisoned his first pick for United States Surgeon General, and in her place, he picked Casey Means. That was Bobby Kennedy's recommendation. Casey Means is a big leader on the nutrition side in the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again movement. And what took everybody by surprise was when Trump made this announcement, everybody knew that the big industry, big pharma, big food was going to come out against Casey Means. And that's, in fact, what they did. What they did not expect was a brouhaha fight within the MAHA movement, as number of very substantial MAGA and MAHA influencers said she shouldn't be Surgeon General for a number of reasons. Among them was Laura Loomer, the right-wing provocateur. For whatever reason, she said that she was unqualified, and she was worried about some of the, let's say, not mainstream spiritual inclinations of Casey Means. Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, much more mainstream than Laura Loomer. However, she stood up for truth. She's very respected within the MAGA and vaccine skeptic movement. She stood up for the truth in Texas as a Texas doctor at Houston Methodist during the COVID vaccine mandates and pushing those injections. She stood up and said she would treat unvaccinated patients when she was told not to. She pointed out the risks of taking the COVID vaccines and the lack of benefits of taking the COVID vaccines. They barred her admission to the hospital. She filed a defamation lawsuit. It's been a long, tough struggle. And she has impeccable credentials as a truth teller, but she came out against Casey Means, among other things, questioning her qualifications. Casey Means did all the work she needed to do to achieve her medical residency and then just quit. And Mary Talley Bowden, if I didn't mention her name, that's the Texas doctor, Mary Talley Bowden, said, that who does that? Who puts all these years, all that effort, and then just decides not to do their residency? Casey Means has also let her medical license lapse, and that has brought about a number of people who've questioned her qualifications. Bobby Kennedy, to his credit, has said, well, with this, that's credentialism, and you're really missing the point. She walked away from traditional medicine because traditional medicine was not working. And he said, and I quote here, Casey Means was born to hold this job. She will provide our country with ethical guidance, wisdom, and gold standard medical advice, even when it challenges popular orthodoxies. She will be a juggernaut against the ossified medical conventions that have helped make our people the sickest in the world at the highest cost per capita. So he is staunchly in her corner. However, his vice presidential running mate during the 2024 election, Nicole Shanahan, another major figure in the MAHA movement, isn't. And she wrote on X, yes, it's very strange. She was writing about Casey Means' appointment. Doesn't make any sense. I was promised that if I supported RFK Jr. in his Senate confirmation, that neither of these siblings would be working under HHS or in an appointment, and that people much more qualified would be. I don't know if RFK very clearly lied to me or what is going on. So the bottom line on all this stuff with Casey Means coming out of, we know why Big Pharma is against her, but one is the residency, and that some people said she and her brother, Callie Means, who is also an advisor to Donald Trump, seemed to have just parachuted in to the movement from nowhere a year or so ago. And so they're not quite trustworthy. And some have even wondered whether they're Big Pharma plants. The big sin among many in the MAHA movement, there's a number of factions, if you will, in the MAHA movement, but from the so-called anti-vax or vaccine skeptic side, is that it's not that she lacks credentials. She wasn't thrown out of medicine. She just didn't want to practice anymore. She let her license lapse. But to them is that she doesn't come across as not sufficiently anti-vaccine enough. They say she did not sufficiently stand up against the COVID shot in particular. And that perhaps is true. She does focus on the nutrition side. However, I will also it's an odd argument to make, because I'll also point out that she's questioned at least a dozen childhood vaccines, as well as the number of doses that children get, now up to 72. And she's questioned the giving of hepatitis B vaccine at birth. So it's not like she is on board with the pharma vaccine schedule. And the other thing is that other people like Jay Bhattacharya, who is now the head of the NIH, who is another Bobby Kennedy ally, who has taken reins of that health agency. Well, if you're going to claim that someone is not sufficiently anti-vaccine, you would have to put him in that category. He very clearly said that while he was open in his confirmation hearings, while he was open to more probing of vaccines, and in particular whether vaccines cause autism. He didn't believe it was. And so he didn't really take a strong anti-vaccine approach to his confirmation hearings. You would think they would come out against him as well. So what does this all mean? I don't think it means anything much. Casey means, in fact, I think it's a positive point, if anything can be taken from this. I don't think Big Pharma has infiltrated the MAHA movement. I don't think these people are necessarily have bad motives. Maybe they're jealous, or maybe they really are just too narrowly focused on the COVID vaccine shots. What I think it shows is that the MAHA movement, and now merging with MAGA, is a very, very strong, evolving, dynamic grassroots movement. And you have, with any big tent movement, many, many differing points of view on any given nomination or position or issue. The one common element that MAHA and MAGA have is a very populist, anti-establishment conscience and leaning and commitment. And I think that all of these people, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to fall in line between this or that vaccine position or nutrition position or this or that nominee. But I think it speaks to how broad this movement has become. If there was nothing but uniformity within our ranks, we should be looking over our shoulder and saying, what's wrong here? Because a robust democratic movement is all about differing opinions and allowing them to flourish. And so I would say that Casey Means' nomination may survive. It may not survive, but I think this is just growing pains within the movement. And it's something to be taken as a positive sign. In just a second, I will return with American Investigator. We'll take a look at the ongoing ceding of authority by Congress to executive agencies, this time the National Park Service. 85 million acres. That's how much land the National Park Service in this country controls. It's a lot of acreage, isn't it? And within that perimeter, within that territory, within that 85 million acres, who decides what a crime is? It's federal land. You would think that Congress would, but you would be thinking wrong. Congress has long ago delegated that authority to the National Park Service, or so the National Park Service claims. And in a new lawsuit, a company called Base Access, its owners and some of its clients, have taken the National Park Service to court, claiming that it has unconstitutionally, it meaning the National Park Service, unconstitutionally wielded a legislative power criminalizing many everyday recreational activities that it has no constitutional right to do. Base jumping, and that's the central claim of this lawsuit, is one of those criminalized activities. We'll get into what that is in a second, but that is a form of skydiving. Roller skating, can't do it. Using a metal detector, you can't do it. And if you do, you could end up with a jail sentence. You could end up with a $5,000 fine. You could end up with a permanent criminal record. So the Base Access Company has said this is an unconstitutional delegation of authority, and represented by the National Civil Liberties Alliance, the New Civil Liberties Alliance, they have gone to federal court to have this overturned. In its defense, the National Park Service says, we have properly delegated authority from Congress to criminalize these activities. The law that they rely on is the National Park Service Organic Act of 1916, which gives the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service broad authority to create regulations for the necessary, proper use and management of the national parks. So they say that this is a national and necessary use and management of the national parks. They also point to an aerial delivery rule, and the aerial delivery rule is part of the regulations formulated out of this law. And that is a rule that forbids the dropping from the skies, for obvious reasons, any cargo into the National Park Services. So what the National Park Service has done is said that these skydivers are essentially cargo that is being illegally dropped into the national parks. So there are a number of claims now as they've gone to court. The central one being that this is a criminal lawmaking authority that they do not have. But one of the claims they're saying is that this lawmaking authority violates the vesting clause of the Constitution that requires all legislative powers remain within the legislative branch. So even if Congress did do it, they didn't have the right to do it. They also say this is a violation of due process because the Organic Act or the aerial delivery rule, neither one mentioned base jumping or the clear description of the prohibited conduct. So they don't get fair notice that what they were doing was illegal. So, and they also claim that this prohibition is arbitrary and capricious because while base jumping is not allowed, hang gliding is. So they're challenging this on its face on all those counts, but the most central one is the constitutional claim that Congress did not or cannot delegate its lawmaking authority to an executive agency. Now, I want to go through for a couple of minutes. I want to go through the complaint that they have filed. This is they're still in discovery and the beginning processes of this lawsuit. But the complaint points this out, and I quote from the complaint. This case, and this is why, by the way, this is why this is so important. I want to highlight it. This case is about fundamental freedom. This is from the complaint. Freedom to engage in lawful recreation on public lands, freedom from arbitrary government overreach, and above all, freedom from prosecution under criminal laws devised by unelected bureaucrats rather than Congress. Now, you can imagine that gets my attention, gets my blood going, because I'm all about the bureaucracy being the dictator. But back to the complaint. Plaintiffs in this action are American citizens, husbands, wives, parents, and working professionals. They're also disciplined athletes, part of a select group of base jumpers worldwide who, through courage, skill, and spirit of adventure, have experienced human flight in some of the most stunning natural landscapes on Earth. But should they ever base jump in the national parks, according to the National Park Service, they are also criminals. Isn't that just like a lot of the government stuff? You know, if you do normal outside activities or normal activities of daily life, and the government can come in arbitrarily criminalize it, particularly on federal lands, but increasingly on any lands, as we've seen in many of the issues that we've covered here on Richard Moore in depth. Now, the complaint points out that for decades, the NPS, the National Park Service, has criminalized not just base jumping, but a vast range of activities in the United States 433 national parks. As a result, the complaint states American citizens face federal misdemeanor charges for performing such unthinkable acts as, you're going to get this, allowing a pet to make noise that is unreasonable. If Rover is barking unreasonably, you're a federal criminal. What about, I mentioned this before, using or merely possessing a metal detector? And if you go to roller skate in the national park, boy, it's Guantanamo Bay for you. The complaint goes on, NPS has also effectively criminalized entire sport, base jumping, without direct congressional authorization, clear regulatory language, or a single assessment of whether base jumping could be permitted in any of the parks under any conditions. So now it's a good time to point out, well, what is base jumping? And the complaint goes into this. So the modern sport of base jumping began in 1978. There was a guy, Carl Banish, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Carl Banish and his wife, two other skydivers. He was a cinematographer and skydiver, and they filmed the world's first base jumps using parachutes from nearly 3,000 foot high summit of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. Banish then coined the acronym BASE, and it stands for Building, Antenna, Span, and Earth. His 1978 film, according to the complaint, captivated the public and demonstrated that base jumping is neither inherently reckless nor an irrational pursuit of danger. Instead, he showed base jumping to be a skill-based, legitimate sport that is accessible to experienced skydivers with the proper training. At its core, the complaint continues, base jumping is an extreme sport in which a parachutist leaps from a fixed structure or a natural feature and deploys a specially designed parachute to control descent. This is something I wouldn't do. Sometimes also incorporating the use of a wingsuit. Since its inception in the late 1970s, base jumping has evolved significantly, driven by advancements in equipment training, safety protocols, all of which have helped contribute to its worldwide recognition as a legitimate extreme sport. Now, the complaint, according to the owners of the company, in the early days, they used modified skydiving equipment. They were not designed to address challenges of fixed object jumps, but the advancements in technology have increased as proper equipment, specialized parachute, wingsuits have all increased safety dramatically. It's given the skydivers greater control during their descent. And they also have software in which they use to predict a flight path, avoid obstacles. In other words, this is a highly skilled, highly technical sport, which does not leave anything to chance, and it's certainly not reckless. So, according to the complaint, these advancements have increased safety and enabled jumpers to exercise significantly more control. And as a result of that, it has a wonderful safety records. Many of the safest and most scenic places to base jump in the world are located in the national parks. The complaint goes on, and that's where this gets interesting. Yosemite National Park, for instance, and I'm quoting again from the complaint, offers ideal conditions due to its many large, sheer walls, which afford a jumper more time to deploy his parachute from a higher altitude. Level cliff ledges at 90-degree angles, which reduce the risk of slipping into an uncontrolled jump. Stable, high-pressure weather systems, which minimize turbulence and unpredictable wind shifts. And soft landing zones, including grass, dirt, and sand, which reduce the risk of injury upon landing. In other words, the national parks are a prime place that you would want to, if you engage in the sport of base jumping, this is where you'd want to base jump. And so they cut to the heart of the matter in the complaint. At the heart of this case is a fundamental constitutional question: can an executive agency, without clear direction from Congress, create and enforce criminal laws that deprive Americans of their liberties? Because if they can do this to base jumpers, folks, they can do it to you. They can do it to me. They can do it to all of us. And the lawsuit says, of course, the answer is unequivocally no. And here's their argument. First of all, the Constitution vests legislative power solely in Congress. Yet here, the complaint argues, the National Park Service has unilaterally transformed a decades-old regulation that predates base jumping itself into an outright prohibition of the sport. The aerial delivery rule, originally issued to regulate aerial deliveries and cargo drops from aircraft, makes no mention of base jumping, nor for that matter, any other recreational activity. And just for emphasis, the complaint points out, Congress has never criminalized the sport. Instead, it enacted the Organic Act of 1916, which gave the MPS the unfettered discretion to prescribe regulations deemed by the agencies to be necessary or proper for the use and management of the national parks. Now, this doesn't come without a history that they point out. In 1980, after base jumping was invented, there was a burgeoning interest in the sport. So the National Park Service, being the good fellows that they are, established a trial permit program in Yosemite National Park, which required the prospective El Capitan jumpers to submit a written application and meet other criteria. There were no fatalities, there were no major injuries during the trial period, but all of a sudden, after 2 months, for some reason, the National Park Service abruptly terminated the program. The agency cited violations of permit conditions, minor injuries, and unpermitted jumps as justification for the shutdown, according to the complaint. And now, reading from the complaint, in a sworn affidavit, former NPS Ranger Carol Moses stated that after NPS terminated the permit program in Yosemite, then NPS Chief Ranger Bill Wendt instructed the Rangers to arrest all base jumpers. In her affidavit, Moses states that although rock climbing and base jumping posed the same logistical issues concerning safety and the gathering of spectators, NPS allowed rock climbing to freely take place in the park because the Rangers sometimes needed the climbers' skill for search and rescue operations. Sounds like a kind of excuse and justification to me. According to Moses, who served as a ranger from 1974 to 1992, about 18 years, then Chief Ranger Wendt made it clear to the rest of the Rangers that he just disliked base jumpers. During one of the Rangers' morning briefings, Wendt explained to the other Rangers that he did not believe base jumping was an appropriate activity, and that unlike rock climbers, Wendt also disliked them, by the way, according to the complaint, base jumpers served no useful purpose. And so since the trial program was terminated way back when in 1980, NPS has enforced a strict ban and has criminalized the sport in virtually all NPS-controlled national parks for nearly 50 years. But again, Congress now has never directly outlawed or otherwise criminalized base jumping in the national parks or anywhere else for that matter. And on top of that, the complaint goes on to say the National Park Service has never issued a regulation. It has internal guidance, but it's never issued a regulation that explicitly names or regulates base jumping. Despite this, the complaint states NPS has consistently criminally prosecuted base jumpers, including 3 of the plaintiffs in this case, over the last 4 decades for violation of the aerial delivery rule. They are cargo, the National Park Service proclaims. Now, if you want to take a look just at some of the injury statistics, the National Park Service does have mortality data going back from 2007 through 2024 from the 433 national parks. Hiking, 502 fatalities, swimming, 447, climbing, 149, biking, 64, camping, 42, photography, including selfie deaths, 27, 23 ski deaths, 20 from canyoneering, base jumping, 8, but 0 fatalities since 2017. So, according to the complaint, as they argue, through the criminal statute, Congress vaguely mandated that the violation of a National Park Service regulation issued under the Organic Act, including those not yet in existence, would constitute a federal crime. The central argument here is that the Organic Act contains no intelligible principle limiting the Department of Interior or the National Park Service their authority to create criminal law, only a vague mandate to conserve and provide for the enjoyment of national parks. So they contend that NPS has seized on the Act's nearly limitless mandate to criminalize countless forms of conduct that the nation's lawmakers never outlawed, That is a violation of the Constitution's vesting clause, not to mention fundamental principles of due process. They also point out that the consequences are very severe. There are criminal penalties. There's even prison time for engaging in a recreational activity that has never been outright criminalized. They say that the National Park Service has refused time and again to reevaluate its position on base jumping with park standards. It has denied every base jumping permit application except for one at an annual event at the New River Gorge Bridge. And by selectively enforcing its aerial regulations against base jumpers, while granting similarly situated recreationalist free access, it has abandoned decision-making in favor of arbitrary rule by decree. Now, I point out that this lawsuit sounds very narrow and very, very specific, but it goes to the broader authority of, number one, Congress continually delegating its lawmaking authority to executive agencies, and then the rogue way those agencies go about it. And so it is the heart of the question as we go to and we see what Congress is doing. We talked about earlier the need to codify President Trump's executive orders. We don't act, our Congress does not enact legislation. It needs to enact. And not only does it do that, but it delegates recklessly over the past century or so its lawmaking responsibilities to executive agencies. And as a result, as the New Civil Liberties Alliance points out, the lawsuit is not just about base jumping. It's about ensuring that federal government agencies remain within their constitutional bounds. As the complaint states, the Organic Act provides no meaningful limits on the agency's authority to prescribe and enforce criminal regulation, leaving all American parkgoers vulnerable to sweeping agency-invented prohibitions carrying the weight of criminal penalties. And here's the important part. Unelected bureaucrats should not get to decide at their discretion what conduct constitutes a crime on 85 million acres of public land, nor on 1 acre of public land, for that matter, they say. The Constitution does not permit such lawmaking by executive fiat. And that goes to, again, the heart of the matter. Executive agencies should be, as they used to be, involved simply in implementing the specific statutes that Congress passes, implementing and enforcing, and nothing more. Today, they set broad regulations, whether it's a prohibition on base jumping, whether it's setting national ambient air quality standards, whether it's doing all of these things. It's partly Congress's fault because they pass the buck. Congress gives them broad mandates, and they are now not just implementing, not just enforcing, they are now lawmaking. They are the lawmakers of the country. That's why I call them the dictatorship. They are the law enforcement. They're the judge. They're the jury. It needs to stop. The time is now, and it needs to happen in this term during these next 2 years. We'll talk about other cases. I appreciate your being here. I'm Richard Moore. This is the American Investigator. Don't forget, Friday, May 16th, Congressman Tiffany and I will have a long discussion, and we'll touch on many of these same issues. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks.